On today's episode of This Week in Space, we're talking about China on the Moon with Space Ace reporter Mike Wall. Stay with us.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is This Week in Space, episode number 113, recorded on May 31st, 2024. China's Heavenly Dream. Hello and welcome to another episode of This Week in Space, the China on the Moon edition. I'm Rod Pyle, editor-in-chief of Ad Magazine, and as always, I'm saddled today. I'm here today with Tariq Malik, the impeccable editor-in-chief of Space.com. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Rod. I'm doing well. I saw a giant hot dog in Times Square yesterday, so I feel like life is complete.
Wow, we've entered the non sequitur zone. That's cool. Yeah, I heard about that. That's rather disturbing because that particular hot dog, if you hit it at the right time of day, you can have it with a nice side of pigeon poop. No. But fortunately, to diffuse our mirth, we're joined by Mike Wall, a space reporter from space.com. Hi, Mike.
Hey, Rod. How's it going?
Good. Nice to see you again. It's always fun to have you on. Before we start, please don't forget to do us a solid. Make sure to like, subscribe, and other podcast goodies because, frankly, we need you. And now a space joke from Dale Dietrich, loyal listener, Dale Dietrich. Well, I hope he's a loyal listener. Hey, Tariq.
Yes, Rod.
What do aliens like to eat?
I don't know. What do aliens like to eat?
Unidentified frying objects.
I love it. Because I identify with it.
Solo laugh. Okay. Save the cosmos from our humor, please. So, though that was a pretty good one, but just in general, send your best, worst, most indifferent space joke at twit@twit.tv. We would appreciate it very much. All right, let's get to some headlines. Now, what This Week in Space would be a This Week in Space if we weren't able to start off with a Starliner update?
Yes.
And literally moments ago, an apologetic press conference began. A very confident press conference ended with Boeing and NASA. And, they're trying. I have to say, though, watching these things go by, I remember SpaceX having a few press conferences about Dragon and Crew Dragon and so forth. I don't remember them having a tenth of as many press conferences or as detailed conversation about, we got a good team and we're looking at that plunger because, plungers can be very delicate things. So you guys, please set me straight on this one. I heard a lot about parachute reefing, which they claim to have worked out, but there was some concern there. And of course, helium leaks because it's slippery stuff. Take it away, guys.
Well, I think Mike can probably bring a few extra points because I was saying offline, I was stuffing my face with lunch during that press conference. So
it's so nice to know.
I know. But no, go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was just going to say, the whole TLDR is that they are ready to launch tomorrow on Saturday, June 1st at like 12:25. And there have been a series of issues in the last few months that have kept pushing things back. They originally supposed to launch on May 6th. That was the first kind of firm date that we gotten after a series of delays with the parachute issue that like you mentioned, Rod. And then they had discovered previously that they wrapped most of their wiring in the capsule and the tape that they determined to be flammable. So they had to go through the capsule and either take the tape out or kind of rewrap it in something else. So that took a long time, but they fixed all that by a May 6th launch date. And a couple hours before liftoff that day, they noticed a weird valve in the rocket that's going to launch the mission which is like an Atlas V by United Launch Alliance. So they had to replace that valve. And when they got that rocket into the assembly building to replace the valve, they also noticed that there was a little helium leak in Starliner in one of its small thrusters that kind of controls how it's oriented in space. So then they took a few more weeks to sort of investigate that and figure out if it was a big deal. And they decided ultimately it was not a big enough deal to keep delaying launch anymore. So we're all set for a launch tomorrow, June 1st, and we shall see.
Now,
so I have a question for both of you.
Go ahead, Rod.
Boeing's been building spacecraft since the 60s of one kind or another, and have a lot of experience in this. They build airplanes. They are a defense contractor. Was it, and this is serious. Was it that SpaceX just talked less about their developmental issues over the years, or were they just better at it? Because we're hearing stuff from Boeing, the idea that I wrapped the tape in flammable material. You'd think an aerospace contractor would have that stuff down by now after being in business for over 100 years.
I would think so. I have two different minds of that question, and then I'm sure Mike, if
a family member at Boeing, but we
no, she's not at Boeing. Oh no, my sister. I don't know. Can I say she actually changed jobs? Now she's at Vast. She's building space stations. Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay, good. So I can feel unconstrained. Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
It's very exciting. But no, I feel that the fact that SpaceX, was fully contained as a private company, fully owned, building everything themselves from the ground up, that they were entrenched in that product mentality, right? Where they're going to build this thing, and then these are the requirements that they're going to build. And meanwhile, Boeing, with that historic kind of legacy as like being an aerospace contractor competing for cost plus contracts, that kind of led it to embrace a bit more of a long, I don't want to say long-winded. That's not the word. A long lead, I guess, is the word. Development approach that was so segmented that they weren't end-to-end testing for everything. Whereas at SpaceX, because they were small and scrappy, they had to test everything at the same time. And they also had a lot of input from NASA, of course, in those Space Act agreements to get the expertise and whatnot there too. So I think that just because they were just fundamentally different companies, they approached the development very differently. At SpaceX, very singularly controlled for one thing, whereas Boeing is, they're doing military stuff, they're doing aerospace stuff, they're doing all that kind of things, and it was all spread out and just kind of got a little bit sidetracked, there in the development and segmented to the point where it kind of sabotaged that initial flight. If they had done end-to-end testing, they might have been able to catch that software glitch before it really came up and bit them. And they said that if they had crew on board, they would have probably been able to stop it too. But it just seems one thing after another. The tape, I don't have an explanation for that. So I don't
apparently nobody
at all.
Does. So Mike, do you think? I mean, there is the other seminal difference of Boeing being publicly traded and SpaceX being private. Does that make a difference in how and when you disclose things?
I'm not I don't know much about the kind of ins and outs of space business. Like, that's not my expertise, so I don't really know. I don't really want to speculate about what kind of difference that makes. But I mean, I'll just say on a larger level, I think we get spoiled by SpaceX just because they're so good at what they do. It's become so routine for them to launch rockets and then land the first stages on a ship at sea. Like, that's become commonplace. I mean, and it's really revolutionary still. I think that we just they've raised the bar so much. I think that when other companies fail to meet that same level, it seems like a real failure. And whereas, it's traditionally been really hard to develop a brand new spacecraft, especially one that carries astronauts. And that's what Starliner is. It's a brand new spacecraft. And when you put people on board, you really do have to be extra careful about everything. And then, I mean, Boeing has gone through that in the public eye in the last few years. And there is no way not to compare them to SpaceX because they both got NASA contracts to do this, launch astronauts to the space station and back. So they are going to be compared with SpaceX. And it is very stark, that sort of difference with how fast SpaceX got up and running. They're in the middle of their 8th operational astronaut mission for NASA, whereas Boeing is still trying to do its first crew test flight. So it is a big difference, and it does make Boeing look kind of bad. But I think that may be more just because SpaceX has been so shockingly good than that Boeing has been so bad, I think.
We should also point out that there are fundamental differences between the approach that SpaceX took and what Boeing did take too, because SpaceX built an uncrewed cargo capsule.
Yeah, true.
And they were able to crew rate the rocket for that, which they also built. So they control the whole launch system, and they took that system and adapted it for crewed flight. Whereas Mike just mentioned, Rod, Boeing had to build the capsule from whole cloth without the experience of flying a version of it, uncrewed for, however many years that they did. I think it was several years that they had been designing and flying that one before they made the adaptation. And that's how we got the Crew Dragon that we call now, or they used to call it Dragon V2 before they changed the name. And so there is a bit of a more evolutionary approach that SpaceX was able to take because they had the cargo contract earlier, and they were able to take everything that they learned in building that and put it into a new spacecraft with experience on both the vehicle itself, whereas Boeing did have to, whole cloth design that Starliner capsule and then ensure that the Atlas V was crew rated with the United Launch Alliance, build those skirts, all those adapters, and all of those systems. So they are very different development processes that can add a lot of extra challenges there.
Which may be one reason why they got almost twice as much money.
To
design their capsule, which probably should have been.
Well, Gwen Shotwell has said that if she knew how much Boeing was going to bid, she would have bid higher. So she's on the record for saying that for SpaceX. So.
No, too late now. All right, let's do a couple more stories before we have to go to our break. Speaking of SpaceX, we had bits of the Dragon landing in North Carolina. We had some scales come down.
That's right. This is actually really exciting because my colleague Brett Tingley lives in North Carolina and was able to actually drive the half an hour to go see it. So he got this. I mean, it's about like the size of like a small kind of coffee table, this big piece of debris. And as Brett put it, it smells a lot like ozone. It was discovered in Canton, North Carolina on the 22nd. And apparently it just fell on like a walking path, like just out of the blue,
like literally in the middle of the path, right?
Exactly. So thankfully, like there was no one walking around during that, but it appears to be part of the trunk, basically the disposable part of a Dragon spacecraft, and they suspect that it might have come from the Crew 7 mission, the previous crewed mission to the one that's on space station right now, and it's just really wild that this. I mean, it looks like just like a big chunk of like twisted blackened metal. There's like these weird spacey circular discs all over it that give it a sci-fi feel, and it's like that. Is it that TV show Dead Like Me, where the main character gets killed by the toilet from the Mir space station as it's re-entering the Earth's atmosphere? It feels a lot like that because it just fell out. And he was marveling that, there's no crater, there's no nothing. It was just lying in the path there as if someone placed it there. But it did fall from the sky. And they don't
have a lot of mass either, right? I mean, that's I think that's all composite from the looks of it.
It's composite material. Also, like it cools off as it falls down, so it's not hot. It's not going to burn anything. And still, you don't want to touch it. It has a lot of sharp edges to it because it did break apart on the way down.
I would not be able to stop myself from touching it.
I know, right?
I probably wouldn't lick it, but I'd have to touch it.
You got to bring your own.
I'm not even sure about that.
You got to bring your own gloves in order to touch it. It looks really clear, but it's on this trail. It's called a glamping collective. It's a 160-acre luxury camping property that lends itself to people to go on these panoramic mountaintop trips and whatnot. And it's about 3 feet by 3 feet, if that helps envision how large it is. So not giant, but also it's not like a small piece of metal or anything like that. And it's interesting because it comes as the FCC is putting out recommendations to avoid space debris explosions in orbit, so that this stuff doesn't endanger other
FCC
craft
or
FAA. Pardon me.
No.
For other vehicles in orbit, or for coming back down to bring us over. And there was other space debris, another piece of the trunk, I think, that they found in Canada, if memory serves. Right?
Yeah. And there was one that came down in Australia a few year back too, I think. Mm-hmm. So it's not the first time. Yeah.
Well, it just proves that what goes up must come down eventually, Rod. So
that's very deep. So I'm going to do an unprecedented thing here. We're going to run to a break real quick, and then we're going to be back with a couple more headlines before we get into our main topic, which is China on the moon. Go nowhere. Let's talk about Venus, that poor maligned trailer park of a planet we have between us and the sun. Oh,
no.
yeah, it's a sad place.
Oh.
But for a while now, the only active probe out there has been JAXA's Venus probe called Akatsuki. Akatsuki, probably. And they've lost contact with it, which is sad. But we have some other players coming into the game, which I'll elaborate as soon as, Tariq, you've had your way with Akatsuki.
Yeah, well, Akatsuki, I mean, it's kind of like Japan's Venus mission that could. It's a $300 million mission that launched in 2010. And unfortunately, when it was initially supposed to arrive around Venus, it had a main engine failure and it missed the planet like completely. And so they weren't able to do it. And yet still JAXA, the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency, was able to basically swing around again in 2015 after 5 years of orbiting the sun and then save the mission. You know, they were able to get a workaround in that time to enter orbit. And since then, Akatsuki has been studying the atmosphere of Venus. You know, it's a crazy kind of hellish planet, helping us understand how its climate evolved, hopefully how our climate won't mimic that and get super hot like it is there, as well as just help us understand like a lot more about the composition of the atmosphere, how fast it is. The winds are so strong and it's so hot on that planet. Also, Akatsuki took this really interesting solar sail out into deep space too and deployed it at Ikaros, and that was a big success too when that happened. But unfortunately, when after Venus Express, the European mission ended several years ago, that left Akatsuki all by itself at Venus, which, as you said, is kind of like the maligned planet. It's the, we keep going to Mars, which is the next planet out, but we don't go in to our next neighbor on the way towards the sun, and so it's just kind of on its own there. And sadly, after 14 years in space, JAXA has lost contact. So they're working to try to understand like what's going on with it. Did it suffer some kind of radiation event, some other kind of equipment malfunction, etc. And then hopefully they'll be able to resurrect it. Now we haven't heard much since we confirmed that they lost contact, but the hope is that they'll be able to figure something out. If they can rescue Voyager 1, Rod, hopefully these egghead scientists will be able to do something for Venus as well.
So I'm not surprised you're a Venus apologist, and I just want to say when the time comes that we could travel these places, I'm going to Mars, I'm sending you to Venus, and think how thin you'll be when you get down to the surface.
That's right.
So, Mike,
I'll have to bring my mask, my filter mask. So.
Want to throw this to you for a second. So we've got NASA heading back with Veritas, I think it is, ESA going back, and even private space industry with Rocket Lab maybe sending their little tiny plunger there, which would, plunger, not toilet plunger, like atmospheric sampler to, I guess, seek organic molecules on the way down towards the surface, although I don't think it'll still be functional when it gets there. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we'll see. We're saying that like historically Venus has been pretty maligned. It's super hot. There's like really high atmospheric pressure on the surface. It's kind of a hellscape now, but it was probably very different like a long time ago. There's a lot of evidence that there was a big ocean on Venus and that it was much more Earth-like in the distant past. And here on Earth, life got going really fast. So if like Venus like was pretty balmy and like pretty temperate for a few 100 million years, 1 billion years, maybe even longer, some scientists think, there's a real chance that it actually could have hosted life. And it's probably not possible for any of that life, if it ever existed, to still survive on the surface. But up higher in the atmosphere, about 30 miles up or so, it's pretty temperate. It's not that hot. There's still clouds made of sulfuric acid, but there are a lot of tough microbes that could theoretically survive that. And there have been a few intriguing hints that there might be something living in the skies. There was big news a couple of years ago. Scientists reported that they discovered this intriguing chemical called phosphine.
Phosphine.
And it's been disputed. People think it might be an artifact, or there's still a lot of back and forth about what it is and if it's actually there, what it could mean. but it sort of reignited this whole debate about, well, why are we ignoring Venus? It could have been an abode for life long ago and might still even be. So that's sort of what has why we're talking more about Venus these days, and why that kind of private life hunting mission that, like you just mentioned, Rocket Lab wants to launch in the next year or so has gotten a lot of support from the scientific community. There's some big time planetary scientists working on that mission. Sarah Seeger, who's like a pretty big name in sort of planetary science, exoplanet biology, that sort of thing. She's associated with that mission. So it's like a big deal. Like a lot of scientists are taking that seriously. So yeah, Venus is trying to kind of elbow its way back into the picture in the next few years or so, and we'll see.
Well, as you can see, I've landed my spacecraft on Venus.
Oh,
So, the poor astronauts over here are trying to get back in.
For our listeners, Rod has these lovely windows behind him that he can change the appearance, and now we've gone from a serene space scene to a hellish, fiery scene.
All right,
crazy hands.
Back to stars. Okay.
Nice.
So-
I would just point out, by the way, that Akatsuki means dawn in Japanese, and so the hope will be that dawn will rise again.
A new
Venus.
dawn, a new sunrise on Venus,
And-
when we can all be incinerated.
And I'll point out that the mission entered an extended phase in 2018, which means that they did complete their primary mission goals. So what they're getting, hopefully, will be extra gravy at Venus.
I don't know what your guys' schedule is, but I think we should go 2 hours today. We have so many things to talk about. Just kidding. All right. The Aurora may be back.
That's right.
That's within
right.
days. Tell me everything, because I want to see it this time.
Yeah. Well, so there was this giant sunspot. It was it used to be called AR 13664, but after it
said with such style.
I know, right? It rotated away from the Earth-facing side of the sun, and it takes about 2 weeks to cross the other side of the sun. And now it's come back again. It's survived. It was 17 times the size of our planet. Now it has a new name. It's called AR 13697 because it's survived. So now we're seeing it, and we give it a new name. And the hope is that we will see the same intense activity. We've already seen some powerful X flares coming from this sunspot group, and it's not facing the Earth yet. So that's what we're waiting for it to get, kind of like the mid section of the sun, where any kind of solar storms and eruptions will pop off. Some of the storms that it's fired off recently have triggered radio blackouts on Earth, but not the geomagnetic storm levels that we saw during that frenetic early May time period. So we've got a few more days before it really gets into center view, and then we'll see how those eruptions affect our planet. Now, hopefully, it's just the more benign, like really powerful, supercharged aurora types, and not the really, really bad fry all of our satellites and endanger astronauts in space type. So we're going to have to wait and see how that works.
So not a Carrington event, probably.
No, we don't want.
Although that'd be pretty exciting to see that all the telephone wires burst into flames. And so forth.
and this was classed as a Carrington level sunspot. Like it has the potential to unleash that type of thing, or at least it did the last time it was here. So we'll see if it still has that same strength coming up. But I also missed it. It rained in New Jersey the entire weekend of that thing, and I'm really hoping for a repeat performance.
Well, and it was cloudy here the first night. So the second night, I went racing out to the desert. You got to drive 2.5 hours out of LA to get away from its lights. Any direction you go at that point, you start picking up lights for the next big city. In this case, it was Barstow, which isn't a big city, but they have lights. That's kind of all Barstow has, except the McDonald's on the way to Las Vegas. And stood there for hours in the dark, seeing nothing but hearing the yahoos over on the next hill fire off their guns at the sky, because it's California, So didn't see anything, but hopefully this time I may head up to Seattle. We'll see. So I just want to give a wrap up on the International Space Development Conference, which I attended for 7 days. It ran for 4, but I was there before and a little bit after for a board meeting. Last week in Los Angeles at the Sheraton Gateway Hotel. And much to our surprise, we knew William Shatner was going to come pick up an award, but in our negotiations with him, he had said, look, I'm just going to drop by and get it and go. Okay, I got stuff to do. He ended up talking for a half an hour. And it was he was riffing a bit, but he talked a lot about his Blue Origin flight and what space was like and his emotions and so forth. It was a real treat. We had Jose Hernandez there, thanks to this very podcast.
Stockton's own astronaut.
Credit to you for the hometown boy. Yeah. And he was fantastic. We had Susan Kilrain. We had Daniel Suarez, the science fiction author. We had Alan Stern of the New Horizons mission. And of course, we had me, for better or worse, doing 8 presentations in 4 days. And because I got so tired of being outclassed by Mr. Malik, here's my Space Pioneer Award.
Wow.
With Mars. You see, you can see Valles Marineris there and everything.
Wow, Rod.
And I got another
amazing.
one, but it's still packed, so I haven't gotten it out yet.
Wait, you received 2 awards?
Yeah, well, the Space Pioneer Awards for me, the other one is from the Space Tourism Society, and I think it was presented to me for the NSS, so I can take credit.
We need some cheers. John, can we get some cheers for Rod Pyle, the Space Pioneer? Because that's amazing. Congratulations, Rod.
Cool. Thank you. Well, it's not an Emmy, but it'll do. No, I was very gratified.
Crickets! No, I wasn't making a joke. No.
Okay. And I wanted to point out, Tariq, credit to both of us. I had 3 or 4 people come up and say, I don't know anything about this conference. These people are kind of odd, but I heard you guys the podcast and you were so cool. We had to come. So shout out to Don and Abigail Sparger.
Hey, Don.
Abigail is Don's daughter. So Don wrote me and I said, oh, please come. I'd love to meet your daughter. So Abigail was not particularly interested in space, as I gather. Started listening to the podcast, and she's college age. She changed her major to a space-related field because of us.
Oh, that's great.
So now we're responsible to find her a 7-figure job when she graduates. So Abigail, that's sensational. More power to you. And then,
can you find one for me too? Then,
well, do you remember the Hawking radiation joke? They set up a swap meet by Jupiter. They're Hawking radiation.
No, I don't think I've heard.
Well, that was one of my favorites. That came from Matthew McCormick, who was there. He's an MD urologist up in Reno with his lovely wife. Came to say hello, and we shared some more bad space jokes. So he's got a lot of plans for us, and he's a loyal listener and delightful couple.
I will be on bated breath. So.
And way too good looking, both of them, to be at our space conference. But you take what you can get. And of course, I would be remiss if I did not relate that we had Melissa Navia, who's Lieutenant Ortegas on Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, there to host. She's
awesome, isn't she?
Well, she is. I've met a lot of Hollywood people over the years, and I met a number of the Star Trek cast members, and they're fun. Really, most of them are really great people. She was just a delight. She would stop and take pictures with anybody. She was talking to the artists. She was talking to the kids. She introduced everything we did. So it was just really, really cool having her there. And man, hats off. She
must really like space, because last year she was at the Humans to Mars conference too, as well. So that's really exciting to see.
It's nice when what she said was she's very interested in it. She hadn't had much exposure before the show, but now that she's heard a little bit more about it, simulates it on the bridge while they're shooting the show, and is meeting people that are into it. Now, in a lot of cases, when people meet space people, they start backing slowly away from you, right? Because we're fanatics. In her case,
I thought that was the standard response. Cool. I thought that was a sign of affection. No,
exactly.
You're saying it's not.
Well, that explains a lot about both of us, Tariq. Honey, why are you backing away? All right.
Well, real quick Star Trek segue, real quick. I just wanted to point out to everyone that the week that we're recording this episode was the finale of Star Trek Discovery on Paramount Plus, and I don't know how I missed it, but they swapped out their helmsman during the series, and their new one was Lieutenant Jemison. As in Mae Jemison, the NASA astronaut who was also on Star Trek Next Generation. It's all connected, Rod. It's all connected.
It's all a conspiracy. Mike, are you a Star Trek fan?
Yeah, but I haven't kept up with the explosion of new shows. It's just a little intimidating. It's sort of like the Star Wars universe has just sort of gotten out of control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and you wonder, I remember when the first
Mike is like looking at us going, nerds.
the first time
I am like really a nerd too, but I'm also a lazy nerd. I can't keep up.
he's a rational nerd. Well, the first times I went to Paramount, the person walking me in there said, all right, this side of Paramount was built by Cheers, and this side of Paramount was built by Star Trek. And I thought they were kidding. But when you look at the revenue from those two franchises and when they went into syndication, it's jaw-dropping. So Michael Dorn showed up at the conference as well.
Worf. That's right.
Yeah.
And I first met him not on the set, but years ago at an air show where he flew in his privately owned Sabre jet.
Wow.
Which is a fighter aircraft from the 50s. They're expensive, but that's the kind of money you make once you're on one of these shows that goes into syndication. It's just there's cash in the mailbox every week. So Tariq, well, all three of us, could we have gone into a more wrong career path to get wealthy than what we did? Although, Mike, you tell me. I hear Tariq does pretty well.
Well, no, I mean, you're on a spacecraft right now, Rod. You're doing pretty well for yourself. You're going high speed. I can see the windows.
I'm a little cramped condo with a couple of green screen circles behind me, but I appreciate the fantasy because my life is a fantasy. Okay, let's take another break, and we will come back and we will talk about China in space. Stand by. Tariq?
Yes, Rod.
You're a space enthusiast of the purest stripe. So without any undue nationalism, tell us what's going on with Chang'e and China and Chang'e 6.
Well, this is great. I mean, I think that Mike, who's been leading the coverage for space.com, can weigh in a little bit more, but just to set the stage, we are on, a few years ago, China made history when, was it in 2018? Is that when they did it? They landed the Chang'e 4 moonlander and rover on the far side of the moon. And that was like the first time we'd ever done that. Humanity has ever done it. So it was a big first for China. So now they're going to send their latest probe, the Chang'e 6 mission, also to the far side of the moon, but also to like the southern kind of polar area of the moon. And they're going to bring back samples. So it's these really ambitious lunar sample return mission to the moon's far side. And we think, and I think Mike's going to correct us, we think it's happening this weekend, right, Mike? Is that it in a nutshell?
That's what people think. It's hard to tell a lot of times. I mean, China is not the most open about their spaceflight their spaceflight plans, which is sort of in keeping with like a lot of their announcements and so on. NASA would have told us exactly what time landing is, and there would be a live stream for it and all that stuff. But China, they tend to give us very little notice, and so we kind of have to rely on kind of outside sources. And I mean, it seems like it's targeted for Saturday evening, and we'll see if that happens. Like, they kind of know around 8 p.m. Eastern time, maybe is what people think.
And that'll actually be Sunday morning, Beijing time.
Or even like the afternoon or something. But and so and kind of like you'd mentioned, Tariq, it's the next step for their for their robotic moon program. They've already landed on the far side of the moon. They did that in very early 2019. So and then they've done a sample return mission from the near side of the moon. They did that in late 2020. And so this is like a combination of those two. They're going to do a sample return mission from the far side of the moon, which we haven't done before. Nobody's done that before because nobody had even landed on the far side of the moon until they did it in 2019. So it'll be a big step forward in spaceflight if they can pull it off. And I certainly wouldn't doubt them. They've pulled off a lot of impressive kind of spaceflight feats recently, and this is just the next escalation of that. And it's pretty interesting scientifically. This is, I'm sure part of the reason they're doing this is because it's never been done. So it's a prestige thing for China, which is pretty important for them. But also, there are big differences between the near side and the far side of the moon, which scientists don't really understand. There are a lot of those big kind of dark seas on the moon. We call them seas, Maria.
The Maria.
Yeah, so there are a lot of those on the near side. We're sort of used to seeing them. Those are old, super old, kind of like volcanic flows that have hardened over time. There aren't nearly there. There are very few of those on the far side, and scientists don't really understand why. It's the same body. Why are there such big differences between how it looks in the near and how it looks on the far side? So, I mean, getting some samples back from the far side, and you can kind of look at them up close, could theoretically help explain what went on geologically on the far side of the moon and why it's so different from the near side. I mean, and it'd just be cool to like be able to look at something from a place that we really don't understand very well. So
I like that he keeps calling it, Rod, the far side and not
the dark side.
The dark side.
I can't stand it when you hear that. And even experienced people say that sometimes. That's right. Ding dong. So I'll just add, we'll come back to Chang'e 6, but I'll just add we have Chang'e 7 scheduled for 2026, which will also be going to the South Pole region, which has, I believe, an orbiter, a rover, and a flyer, which will be able to hop from place to place on the lunar surface, which is pretty cool. And then probably for 2028, Chang'e 8, which will be an ISRU in situ resource utilization experiment that will attempt to do 3D printing with lunar regolith, which is challenging because you've got to grab the dirt, you got to sift it, sort it into the right size particle, and then extrude it with some kind of binder. There's a number of ways to do it. You can also do sintering if you're looking at metal, but since they're going to just probably be looking at, I assume, powdered basalt wherever they land, they'll need some kind of binder. But it's hard, this is just a small demonstration. I mean, we're years away from seeing this on a big scale, but this is aggressive. I mean, that's the year we're supposed to be, that's past the time we're supposed to be landing astronauts with Artemis. And my prediction.
Yes, Rod?
Bet you for that chair. Not much of a stretch is that China, they say early 2030 to early 2030s for a human landing. It's going to be 2029 because that's the 80th anniversary of the Communist Party's conquest of China when they managed to displace the Kuomintang government out to Taiwan. So, it's hard to imagine that anything short of certain death for the crew, I don't think is going to stop them from trying to make that deadline. But who knows?
Well, we should recap just briefly. I mean, you talked about the next missions to come, but so the Chang'e 1 mission launched in 2007. That was the first orbiter that China launched to study the moon. Then they launched Chang'e 2 in 2010. And that was another orbiter that was very successful at imaging the moon. And I think they sent that to a Lagrange point. Is that right? After it was over with, Mike? So they had I believe they did.
I'll have to look it up, but that sounds right.
And then for Chang'e 3, they put the lander and then the U2 rover on the Earth facing side of the moon, and did all of their exploration. That was great. The Chang'e, and then Chang'e 4 was the far side lander, correct? With a rover, and because it's on the far side, they also built relay satellites, the Queequeg satellites, to be able to beam the signals back, right? And then they followed that up with the Chang'e 5 TI or ET. Anyway, it was like they launched TI. Yeah, they launched a capsule around the moon and brought it back to prove that they could do sample return. Then they launched the Chang'e 5 sample return mission, which had the orbiter and the return vehicle and the lander and all of that fun stuff. And then now here we are, and that was in 2020. And then now here we are in 2024 with this Chang'e 6 mission. So like 5-6 years apart, between 4 to 6 years apart, each of these missions, plop, all the way up to here. And then a bit more of a packed schedule going to Chang'e 7, Chang'e 8, every 2 years now, going forward. So it's been a bit of a locomotive of building up to this point.
Well, and we should mention what it's building toward. If everything goes well for China, they've got this big plan to do a moon base near the South Pole called the ILRS, the International Lunar Research
Station.
Research Station, yeah. They're partnering with Russia on that theoretically, and a few other nations who have signed up for it. It's like kind of their version of the Artemis program, and it's doesn't have anything to do with Artemis. There's not going to be any cooperation between the two, but it's sort of like the new space race to the moon. they're basically hoping to set up like a crewed outpost kind of near the moon's south pole in the mid 2030s or kind of late 2030s. So all of this stuff that they're doing with uncrewed Chang'e missions are to gain sort of all the knowledge that they need and all the skills that they need to build up toward that. And it's sort of, NASA is obviously doing something similar. Artemis aims to get a moon, like a crewed moon outpost or more near the moon's south pole, kind of up and running by the late 2020s, early 2030s. We'll see if that happens. But yeah, so China has like similar ambitions, and just like you said, Rod, I'm sure they would want to beat NASA to the moon with astronauts if at all possible. So they might downplay that, but I'm sure that's really important to them.
And of course, dear listeners, when we say crewed outposts, we don't mean like shanties on the moon. No. Crewed with astronauts, CREWED.
Yeah. It's not Venus, okay? So, it's interesting you mentioned that because, nationalism is such a part of this. And on the one hand, they say, no, this is all meant in the spirit of peace, goodwill, and Bobby Sherman and all that kind of stuff. But at the same time, if you read their white papers over the years, it's really clear, and they're not shy about it. This is for a great national program, for goals. We're going to be world beating, all that kind of stuff. They just have been a little quieter about it recently. It is worth noting, by the way, a couple of things. Then we've got one more break. That Artemis, I think, just signed. Was it their 41st or 42nd when Peru signed member? You guys remember?
Oh, it's somewhere in there. 40
plus. Maybe? Yeah. And I think it's 41 or 42. And I think the ILRS, which has also invited international signatories, is at 8. Now, what does that really mean?
Pakistan and so on, Belarus are signed on to the ILRS, whereas,
Belarus, shocking.
Yeah.
Yeah. Come here, vassal puppy. But what these signatories really mean. I think China could get legitimate cooperation out of Russia because obviously Russia is a very experienced, seasoned space power. In our agreement with some of the smaller countries, what Latvia or Peru will contribute, we don't really know. Those countries don't really know, at least the few I've talked to. So I think that's something we'll have to figure out. Is this just a gesture of goodwill from potentially non-aligned partners, or is it something more meaningful, and will they eventually travel to the moon? I did also want to mention China's done something very clever, I think. They're a very old civilization. They have really wrapped this program. We name our spacecraft after Greek gods and goddesses for representation. And some Americans may actually know what that means. A lot probably don't. In China, though, they're really seeped in this whole national mythos and so forth. So Chang'e is the goddess of the moon and wife of Hu Yi, the great archer. She is renowned for her beauty and known for ascending to the moon with her pet rabbit, Yutu, the moon rabbit, and living in the moon palace.
Yeah.
And she is one of the major goddesses in Chinese mythology, blah, 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 blah. And their crewed vehicle for sending people to their space station on the moon and their lander also have sort of frou-frou names. The space capsule, which looks a lot like the Dragon 1, is named Mengzhou, Vessel of Dreams, which I like that.
Yeah, it's nice.
You can lie in it and take a nap. And their lunar lander, which looks a bit like a cross between the lunar module and the former Soviet unsuccessful lander, is called Lanyue, which means embracing the moon. It even has a little rover. So we got more to say about this, and we will do so just right after this ad break. Stay with us. So, Mike, from your viewpoint as an observer of all this, do you have anything to add about the significance of Chang'e 6 and what they're doing? They're landing at a crater called Apollo, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
Apollo Basin.
I would just say, there's a real nationalist kind of part of this moon landing that we're about to see, China. But we also have to mention there's been a lot of patriotic nationalist rhetoric coming out of the US about the Artemis program, and
why, what do you mean?
So we as a nation are doing sort of the same thing. We've invested a lot of national pride in the whole Artemis program, and multiple NASA officials and kind of DoD officials in the US have mentioned, it's really important that we beat China to the moon, and there's a new space race and all this stuff. So I just think it's important to kind of state that all the nationalist stuff is not just coming from the Chinese side. Like there's a lot of it coming from the American side too. And if you talk to a lot of NASA people, DoD people here, they will say, it's this really does matter who puts boots on the moon kind of next. We obviously did it with 50 years ago with the Apollo program, but what really matters now is who gets to set the sort of standards of good behavior on the moon with an extensive human presence there, because it's kind of like a Wild West. Whoever gets there first gets to sort of set the norms of behavior. And it's important that that's the United States rather than an adversary nation. So those are the sorts of things that people say to kind of back up or why it's so important, or why there's all this nationalist rhetoric coming out. But yeah, I mean, both sides of this new space race are kind of coming at it from a similar angle with the patriotism stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
Being a fading boomer, I kind of the last of the boomers, I guess, due to my birth date. I grew up during the space race, so I'm certainly as much of a nationalist as anybody on that side of things. But by the same token, and I hear what you're saying, and I've talked to those same people and read what they say. They are signatory to the Outer Space Treaty. China is, which says you can't own that property. There's a question as to how much of a claim can you stake to resources and so forth. But unless they're really going to go rogue, it seems like the most likely thing is they're going to claim an exclusion zone wherever they are. And I guess the question is how big that is. If I have an oil derrick out in the North Sea or an oil platform, I want to have an exclusion zone, requesting that foreign actors don't come too close and aim their bazookas or their machetes at me. But it's a little different than saying, okay, the Aitken Basin is ours, stay out.
Well, and that's a point that Bill Nelson, the NASA administrator, actually made as recently as last week during an appropriations subcommittee hearing on Capitol Hill, where he was speaking. He actually said, and I quote, because I wrote this down at the time, he said, "We are in a space race. If we let China get there first, mindful of what China has done on terra firma, mainly going through the South China Sea." He was talking about the Spratly Islands, saying, "This is all ours, stay out." Nelson says, "I'm concerned. You can tell where a fella's going by where he's been." So they're worried about that, because both of these initiatives are targeting kind of the same area, largely because that's where all the ice and water ice resources are that they want to use for all of these other things, and or where they think they can get it easily. And so there's no police, there's no UN on the moon right now that can swoop in.
So I have a solution for that. So there's that little island. I don't think it's a Spratlys. I think it's another one. It's basically a sandbar near the Philippines that the Philippines claims and China claims. So the Philippines, in a very kind of smart move, took this old derelict freighter they weren't using anymore and towed it and rammed it onto the sandbar, and then put 4 commandos on it, and they rotate these guys off every few months. But this thing's a rusting hulk. I mean, if you're walking across the hull plates, first of all, it's slanted and tilted, so you got to watch it. And there's actually holes rusted in the main deck. But these guys basically camp there. They take sleeping bags and sidearms and some Fritos and Mountain Dew and Monster, and they hang out there for a week. And every now and then, the Chinese will drive by in one of their destroyers or frigates, and all their sailors line up along the edge and growl and gnash their teeth and put their claws out. And the Filipinos kind of wave back, go, "Hey, how's it going? Stay off our island." So maybe we need to do that on the moon, Tariq. You and me and Mike will get ourselves a Dragon capsule, and we'll crash down the South Pole Lake and Basin, and we'll just camp out until Artemis comes to save us. But in the meantime, we'll growl at the Chinese when they land. Do I not come up with the best ideas?
Yeah. I'd just like to know what your plan is when they come and push you over, So
hey, I'm hard to push over. Okay, just saying. Mike, you're being suspiciously quiet through this whole thing.
No, I'm just.
I don't think Mike wants to go to the moon to keep everybody off. So.
No, I'm gonna wait for Starship maybe to have 1,000 flights under its belt before I would ride it to the moon. We'll just see how it goes.
Really, 1,000? You'd wait that long?
We should. Well, if they have to, I think it takes that many to refuel the Starship, right? To get to the moon, right?
Oh, ow! Oh. Hey, SpaceX, that was Tariq Malik over in the other window, not me. Yeah.
So I wanted to ask real quick, Mike, because we were talking a lot about what, space races and whatnot. We haven't talked a lot about the science for Chang'e 6, and this is a little bit different. It seems like from reading some of the stories that you've been commissioning and getting up on space than some of the past ones that we've seen, where it was wholly overseen by China's space program. This one seems to have at least some contributions, right, on it. Can you talk about a few of those at all?
Well, there is like European Space Agency. I believe does have like an instrument, or if it's not an instrument, it's like a collaboration involved with some of the science going on. And there'll be there are a number of science instruments. I think there might be 4 on it, and it's like not China only. They have been like a little more collaborative with the science projects on this mission, and so that'll be interesting. There's still no substantive kind of U.S.-China collaboration in lots of ways. That's still it's like expressly forbidden by a 2011 amendment. You would have to get express written permission from Congress before you work substantially with China on a space project, basically, if you're on the U.S. side. So that's why China, for instance, is not a member of the International Space Station Coalition and so on, and why you won't see Chinese astronauts going there anytime soon. Probably they've got their own space station now anyway, so they're probably not clamoring to do that. But yeah, it's sort of interesting that there is more international collaboration on this mission, and as China becomes a bigger and bigger player in spaceflight, as we see it becoming right before our eyes, and like you were saying, Rod, they do have big ambitions. They have scarcely kind of disguised their ambitions to be the number one space power in the world, and they're definitely closing that gap that exists between us and China. You're probably going to see more folks want to work with them as they launch more and more things, and it'll be interesting to see how space partnerships evolve over the next few years.
Well, since you brought it up, so their partners on Chang'e 6 are France, Italy, Sweden. Mm-hmm. Are giving them lander science packages, and Pakistan, interestingly, is contributing an optical imaging CubeSat.
Yeah, it took pictures. It took pictures of the moon and the sun.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
And according to Leonard David too. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Oh well, we need to take one more break. So
sure. Yeah, I got one more thing then after the break. So
okay, Leonard's old. He can wait one more minute. All right,
no, we love you.
Stand by. We'll be right back. And I'm almost as old as Leonard, so I can't make anybody. And it all depends on how it shows on you.
So Leonard actually wrote a story for space.com about this mission, about how they're getting ready to do it. And he actually spoke to James Head, who is the head of the Department of Earth, Environment, and Planetary Science at Brown University. And he's also working with lunar exploration planners with the China National Space Agency on this mission and others. So wait, there is James Head. James Head, this astronomer there. So there are researchers that that in the U.S. that are also kind of participating in one form or another. It may not be like a straight up like a NASA cooperation type.
Right. Yeah, I would I just need to clarify, Tariq. Yeah, it's for NASA to sort of collaborate, or like U.S. government entity can't collaborate with the Chinese National Space Agency in any big way unless they get express written consent from Congress.
And one kind of that kind of dire picture that Bill Nelson painted about one country going to one part of the moon and saying this is all mine. No one else gets it. We actually saw that get dispelled a little bit with the Chang'e 5 samples that China collected, because they are now sharing those and making them available. It's been several years, since after their mission scientists have had their experiments done, but they're coming up with a plan to share those samples as well. So there is some access being granted on an international stage to share the data for these missions that has some promise for what that might mean for the future and potential future collaborations across all of the partner nations for all of these projects themselves. So
I wonder, so there was this country that went to the moon 50 years ago and landed 6 times and planted flags 6 times, and they're probably bleached white by this point, but they're still there. Could this country, should it deem it necessary for national security issues, retroactively say, by the way, we changed our mind and we didn't go for all mankind, we went for us, and that's our exclusion zone, and it runs from the South Pole to the North Pole. I realize I'm being a bit fanciful here, but
wait, which country are you referring to, Rod?
Oh,
which one?
There's this. Well, and at this point, I mean, the Soviet Union's been there as before they were the Russian Federation. So I guess what I'm saying is, in theory, I would guess anybody who's actually been there and landed an object could make some rational claim of territory if they were concerned the Chinese were going to do so, unless there's some legal argument that says, no, you have to be in the process of utilizing something or creating something new to do that, which I don't think is the case. Do you guys have any thoughts about that?
Well, Mike, isn't that the treaty for the peaceful use of outer space says? We can't claim parts of the moon. We can't just say
no.
Well, it says that, but that doesn't mean it'll stop anybody.
That's the thing. There's, like I was saying, there's no UN force on the moon. There's
there is no enforcement mechanism in place, right, I guess, for these treaties. So if somebody wanted to flout those treaties, then that's the big question. What would happen? What would the consequences be? And I don't think anybody knows.
Well, I do know, as I may have said once or twice on this show, that in 1964, the Rock Island Armory, that big military, the arsenal, whichever the big firearms weapons arsenal is out in your end of the country, Tariq. I can't remember what it is. Do you remember what I'm talking about? It's the RAA.
I do not know. No.
It's the Rock Island Arsenal. Anyway, it's a weapons facility active since, I think, before 1900. Issued a report called The Meanderings of a Weapons-Oriented Mind in a Vacuum. And I think he meant the weapons in a vacuum, not the mind in the vacuum. But it's 20 pages or something, but it looks at about 12 different designs for handheld space weapons. So we already know.
How did we get to space weapons from Lunar Sample Return?
Because we watched For All Mankind, right? So, they were using M16s, big problem, lubrication, unless you have figured out something better, could dry out in a vacuum, especially at those temperatures. And then, the metal welds itself and your weapon blows up. So these were mostly air rifles and air pistols or spring powered. So they were either gas powered or spring powered or rocket powered. So they actually had a handheld rocket gun. The idea being that, you don't need a lot of firepower because you don't need to kill the bad guy. You just need to puncture his spacesuit and watch him lie there and flop around. And that'll cause two of his friends to come out and get him, and then you tied up three people. And it was very dark thinking back in those days, but not nearly as dark as von Braun's Project Horizon moon base, for which they developed lunar claymores and a lunar backpack carried nuclear bazooka with, I think, about half a kiloton yield. Yeah, which they tested. So we have footage of that somewhere.
We're making a lot of leaps. I'm making the leap. I'm the bad guy. Yeah. I do feel that we should at least give some credit where credit is due, because while we can hem and haw, and NASA's chief, Bill Nelson, can hand wring and kind of rattle the sabers a bit about the supposed space race, I will point out one thing. Dean Chang, the Chinese space program expert in the U.S., he was actually at the Humans to Mars conference earlier this month, and he actually mentioned something that's very telling about are we in a space race or not, and he pointed out that in the white papers that outlined not just the sample return mission that we're talking about with Chang'e 6, but also all of the missions that preceded it and the plans that China has for future lunar exploration, that they've all been listed out with very achievable dates that they're largely on track meeting. Whereas at least in the US, the targets were, we're going to land people back on the moon by 2020. Then we missed that from, under the Constellation program. Then it's 2024. Hey, it's 2024 right now, right? And we're not gonna make it. And now it's 2026. And that those delays keep getting pushed, and there's no there's no repercussions, right? SpaceX hasn't lost a contract because they don't have a lander yet. And the same is true for, we don't have a fleet of SLS rockets waiting to go there, but no one's getting, punished or whatever for that. And he used that as an example to say, if that feels like an actual race that we're actually trying to run, then it's a very different definition of race that people might have, about being in that we're not acting like we're actually in a race at all. But there is a lot of science that this Chang'e 6 mission is going to be able to do. New stuff like Mike, you were talking about, these kind of really weird, pristine kind of rocks and from a very different environment. And I think that's going to be really exciting. And Mike, I assume you haven't heard either. We don't know if they're going to broadcast the landing live like they might have in the past. They usually make those announcements very late in the game. But that could be a sign of opening up, their program a little bit more if they're going to give public access to that kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I haven't checked recently. I mean, maybe they already have posted something, but I'm not sure. And it's possible they will, but I think it's important just to stress that, like, all the hand-wringing aside and everything that we're talking about with, like, all the rhetoric about the space race, I think it's important just to take a step back and acknowledge the accomplishments of these moon missions. China has really done some amazing things with the Chang'e program. And so far, it's all been for science. There hasn't been anything nefarious about any of this stuff, So I think it's important just from, if you're a space enthusiast and you care about planetary science and so on, China has done some amazing things in the past 15 years that
they grew a plant on the moon, right?
Yeah. And
Briefly.
lots of things are happening, and like a lot of them, if you care about humanity getting its footprint, kind of extending it out to the moon, and then to Mars, a lot of exciting things are actually happening in that regard, and they aren't all from the U.S. side. So that's an interesting development, and we will see where it goes.
Well, people working on space programs domestically could be a lot more motivated if they knew upon failure that a black van would pull up to their home and do organ harvesting or something. It's just rumors, but
that was also mentioned during the panel on China's moon exploration.
Was it?
Mars exploration? Well, that the price of failure is substantially higher. It can be substantially.
There are conversations to be had about a command and control economy and how much faster you can move when you don't have to go through Congress and get things up for public debate. And all, that's
or when your president serves for life, right?
Right.
No more of these messy party changes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's another discussion. Saying China has done really amazing things in space it's not like an endorsement of their political system. It's just an observation that kind of stands on its own.
Mike should be a professor, don't you think?
He is Dr. Mike Wall.
Yeah, he is, and you have that kind of quality to your speech, which is a good contrast to.
There's a lot of hemming and
my slovenly behavior. No, it's good. It keeps us on track, so I don't just say America first. All right. Well, this has been a pleasure, guys, and we should revisit this again after we find out what Chang'e 6 is able to pull off. So everybody, thanks again for joining us for this time, episode 113, lucky 13 of This Week in Space, China on the Moon. Don't forget to check out space.com where you can find both these fine gentlemen, because that's where they hang their hats. Websites of the name, and of course, the National Space Society at nss.org. Both are good places to hang out because what more do you need? We're there. Come on. What more could you want? Tariq's looking sick to his stomach. Mike, where's the best place to follow your misadventures?
You can just find me at space.com. And if you're interested in my Twitter account, which I almost never use, then
And let us not forget, my friend, you have a book that is still in print.
I do have a book out there. It's published almost 5 years ago now about the search for alien life and what we're kind of looking at in that for the next few years and what the prospect is of actually finding something out there. And that's an exciting conversation that's going to get more exciting as the next few years progress. And maybe we launch that atmospheric probe to Venus and we get a Mars sample return mission, hopefully at some point, or actually maybe China will do that first too.
It's looking very promising for them. And I like the fact that you have a book out there called Out There.
It is out there.
probably made your news conferences confusing. Tariq, where can we continue to track your PlayStation lifestyle?
Well, I mean, PlayStation. No, I'm a PC person, Rod. If you really knew me, you would know that by now. But okay, no. You can
I know you better than I need to, my friend.
You can find me. We shared a boat together, Rod. Right? So
you
lovely.
Have to make it
lovely.
You have to make it sound scary. It wasn't that bad. That's true. It wasn't overnight, though. Now that you mentioned it.
No, you can find me at space.com as always, trying to fight that good fight and chronicle the ins and outs of our ventures across the cosmos. And on the Twitter at Tariq J Malik well, I guess that's what it is, at Tariq J Malik. And this weekend you will find me watching. Let's count them down. Progress 88 dock at the International Space Station on Saturday morning. The Starliner launch on Saturday afternoon. The Chang'e 6 landing on Saturday evening. The Starliner docking, hopefully, on Sunday afternoon. And then NASA's big victory lap with Boeing, where they can say that their astronauts finally got there. So it's going to be a very, very busy weekend. And Rocket Lab is going to launch the pre-fire mission, the second satellite for NASA late Friday night. So big weekend in space, and you'll find us all at space.com kind of chronicling that.
And when's the putative date for Starship?
June 6th. Hey, next week. Next week. So
yeah.
Crossing fingers.
Before we speak next, Starship Flight 4 may have, made it all the way to Hawaii. So... Or
I think it's going to
the Indian Ocean. The Indian Ocean, yeah.
So, June 5th, I think, right? That's the target date.
The 5th, not the 6th. June 5th. So,
guys, get your story straight. All right. Remember to drop us a line at twit.tv. That's TWIS at twit.tv. We welcome your comments, suggestions, ideas, and we do answer our emails, as our folks that showed up at the ISDC can attest. New episodes of this podcast published every Friday on your favorite podcatcher, so make sure to subscribe, tell your friends, give us reviews, thumbs up, 5 stars, 3 little hearts, a unicorn, or my favorite pony will do. Don't forget, you can get all the great programming that is offered by the Twit Network ad-free on Club Twit, as well as some extras that are only found there. And we do have a constant running loop of Tariq falling out of his chair, just so you know. For just $7 a month, which is a bargain. And we're counting on you. So don't let us down. You can follow the Twit Tech Podcast Network at Twit on Twitter and on Facebook and twit.tv on Instagram. Gentlemen, I thank you. And Tariq, I'll see you next week. And Mike, I hope I see you soon.
Yeah. Sure. Yep. I'm sure I'll be back.
Everybody.
You'll have me.
Oh, you will. You can count.